Hello, Robin. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to the Women in ADHD podcast.
Katie.
Okay, well, let's start. You were diagnosed 20 years ago, is that correct?
20 years ago.
And yeah, that's amazing. It's always amazing to me because I feel like the climate, the landscape around neurodivergence has changed so much in such a short period of time. So I'm curious in terms of your own understanding about ADHD. What was happening? What kind of led to the diagnosis in the first place?
Yeah.
What were those things that really led you to put two and two together for yourself and to say, I really should look into this?
Yeah. It's really, really cool to turn 50 because I'm like looking backwards at these things. I think it's a natural process, at least talking to other friends that they're doing that. But for me, one of those things is that reality of like, when did I start to realize I had ADHD? What did this look like? And I just love every single woman that's been on your podcast that I've heard. It feels like you make a new friend and oh, I want to call her and ask her this question. But so I always knew I was different. So that makes it hard to find a start point, right? I have kindergarten stories, I have college stories, I have high school stories, but I really specifically remembering I was going through a lot of mental health challenges in my early 20s, figured out there was help for that, and was working towards that. And a therapist saying to me, almost just like planting the seed that I completely ignored in my early 20s, I think you have ADHD. And I was like, what is this? It's so funny to think I didn't have a clue in the world what that was. It sounded like this huge pathological term. Like, I don't want to have that, whatever it is. I'm sure it doesn't apply to me. Um, and then just fast forward to a couple years later, not many. I'm 30 and married, having lots of unexpected challenges that I didn't understand. I blamed him. Um, like all of us should, right? Um, it was it was purely him. But then I'm in this master's program for reading to learn how to teach reading, and I'm working as a teacher of the deaf. So I'm in special education, and I guess the year then is like 2002. And there's this phrase that's talking about associative thinking as being atypical, and it's describing it against linear thinking, which is typical. And it describes associative thinking as something like you talk about an apple that's red, and all of a sudden you're talking about the red car that drove down the road. And wait, how fast was that car? I bet I could go faster than you can in my, right? And I'm reading that and reading that. And I was always challenged with reading growing up. So, college level reading, it would not be uncommon to read something twice. But I mean, I read this 4 or 5 times, and it wasn't because I couldn't read it. It was because, I mean, what's wrong with associative thinking? And then just magically this light bulb goes off, and I'm like, oh, that's how I think. That's why this doesn't seem, atypical to me. And from that point forward, it was reading, reading. I listened to Sari Solden on your podcast, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, she has no idea. In 2002, that was like my person, right? And then Catherine Nadeo and Driven to Distraction with Hellwell. And I just remembered those being, there weren't really podcasts or anything but books. So I was just buying books, to survive or to understand and conceptualize my own life. Um, yeah. So I think it was just a matter of that. And then looking through my family history, and I just kept becoming increasingly, I just was like, this is me. This all makes sense. It was giving context to my life. It was exciting, like, as opposed to what I thought the first time somebody said ADHD, it was like, oh, relief. This is just my brain. This is how it works. And and then I think it was just I'm a very bottom up thinker. Like, I need all the details before you could convince me, and they all need to line up. So the next thing was I needed formal diagnosis. Now I'm meeting lots of adults that don't feel that they need the like stamp of approval. But then I really, really needed that. And I got, now I know, I didn't know then, but I got really lucky that I called a place covered by my insurance. I said, I really need a thorough assessment. I knew women were, even at that point, you know, not as diagnosed as men. And I need somebody that really, really gets it. And I got a therapist that walked through. Now, they didn't look for any other, now we think of neurodivergence so differently. So they didn't look for any other aspects of being neurodivergent. No learning disabilities, no, do you fall into the autism spectrum in any way? But they thoroughly evaluated me for ADHD and then, concluded I had above average intelligence. And also I passed, so to speak, right?
I know, I always joke, I aced that test.
Yeah, nailed it.
Yeah. Interesting. So did you find there was some pushback or stigma involved in the process of seeking the diagnosis?
Yeah, and so I was kind of walking through this morning, our conversation and what that might look like. And for me, the one word that just kept coming up with was masking, and how interesting it is that I was diagnosed 20 years ago because, there was this childhood of feeling rejected and confusion and kind of, I was raised at a time where it was very common to have authoritative parents, right? Like just kind of, get it together, girl. You got to do this. What's the message? What you can't? Too bad. Do it anyway. Figure it out. So there's just always that. And then there was the transition into being a young professional, able, somehow by the grace of God and a whole lot of work, I had made it through undergrad rather successfully, and then was at a master's level and fully employed, married. And I thought, especially working in special education, I was so naive. I thought if I go to people now and tell them, because to me it was so exciting and it made so much sense, they're going to give me accommodations. They're going to embrace this. They know I'm not lazy, right? Like they've seen me perform. So there's certainly, when I say this is really hard, why are we changing systems again? Because that was the whole thing. IEP writers were changing every year, and it would take me so long to get a hold of, what's the system that we're using to create these documents. And then it'd be I'm being dramatic, but maybe it was 2 years. And they're another training to do it again. And I was oh my gosh, this is killing me. And I remember 2 specific times saying to people, the one was a professor in my master's for reading. I said, and it takes such courage, to say I have ADHD, right? So I had really thought it out. And I was I'm going to tell her I'm drowning. You know what I realized? I have ADHD. And she says, and I'm like, it's going to be better than I imagine, And she goes, so all of us have ADHD. And I go, no, I have a diagnosis and it started at birth and I have childhood memory. She's okay, well, all of us have ADHD. I was oh, okay, thanks, bye. And I remember walking back away just so small, oh, don't do that again. Don't tell people that again. And I think even privately it was, no, you don't. What? Oh, okay. And I think that it was minimized just by all the masking I had learned to do to make it look okay, right? And still, there's some of that, but I don't know. It's not, I don't think that the climate is quite as harsh. Or I've created a whole life that feels safe and warm based on who I am. So it's a lot easier, to go out and be the change and be the safe person for somebody now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's all of those things combined, right? I think that, like you said with masking, and, one of the things I think a lot of us have to ask ourselves is, what was, one of the reasons why I asked that question, looking back over your life, the signs were there all along. What did they look like? Because I think obviously it so much of our experience in childhood was, being sent those messages of, I have to figure this out myself. I have to get it together, right? I have to do this. I have to work harder. And then really feeling like we're struggling against ourselves. So yeah, if a professor says we all have ADHD, that's just another way of saying, figure it out, get it together, join the club, right? As though there is, it's your personal laziness or your, inability that is keeping you from figuring out having, where you have a genuine processing disorder. Like,
Yeah.
and so we're
Totally.
constantly questioning, is this something that's genuine, or am I just trying to make excuses for myself? And
Yeah.
then those are those moments where I'm like, I wonder why we're all so exhausted. And I wonder why we all get to, diagnosed with depression and all of those things
Oh,
that so many
wow.
of us have in common.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. And I remember trying again at so I have two masters, right? So I was like, I'll do this again. And the response was, well, when people are struggling, then we provide accommodations for people with ADHD. And I thought, and again, you just take a deep breath and walk away because it's so vulnerable to ask in the first place, or even just open the door to the conversation. And inside, ADHD people, I share this trait with many of being just, so there's that part of me inside that's like, this is so wrong. And then the part of me that's like, listen, it may be wrong, but you're probably not going to impact this system today. So go write your paper and put your mind to something that you can change. So yeah, it's interesting to ask that question. And I wonder what, I have a lot of colleagues that work in the college arena, work in businesses, trying to advocate for neurodiverse people and creating changes, and accommodations. And I don't know, my last experience, I think, with a system that gave me a response was, along those lines. Everybody has ADHD. We'll help you once you're challenged or you're struggling. Meanwhile, you're struggling, right? Because staying up all night to do paperwork wasn't, that's not something everybody has to do. That's a unique, different, different experience. So,
Yeah, and I think it also just it forwards that narrative of, only ask for help if you are at your absolute wit's end, right? And you've exhausted all other avenues within yourself.
yeah,
Then you can ask for help, as opposed to, well, no, accommodations are supposed to keep me from struggling, right?
yeah,
Yeah, I know
yeah.
I'm
Well,
facing that
and
with my kids.
you are, yeah,
Yeah, just our, and I'm so grateful for the amount of knowledge and advocacy I'm able to do on their behalf around ADHD and what it looks like in school, because, oftentimes, and I complain about this to anybody who will listen when it comes to my kids, because they do
yeah,
really, really, their grades are really, really high. That's not where they're struggling. And so oftentimes in the 504 meetings, I met with the teachers who are like, why are we here? Why are we even talking about accommodations? They're doing fine. And you only using their grades as a metric for how they're doing. I'm like, well, they're actually really, really struggling,
yeah,
in with
yeah,
anxiety and and having a lot of emotional breakdowns, and they're sort of like, well, then they should see a therapist. Like,
yeah. And you're like,
and
no,
yeah.
but you have them like the bulk of their day. I know. I have experience advocate. I don't provide advocacy services, but when people know what you walk into the arena sometimes with people. And I've advocated to small private schools and had that experience where, when you talk about and know so much about ADHD and autism and right, and all these invisible giftedness challenges that exist, anxiety in kids is a huge one, and you walk into a space with educators to have the conversation, and whether it's your child or it's someone else's, you care or you wouldn't show up to do it, and then you're almost like blindsided with the reality that they do not hear or see what you see, and the letters behind my name get me more of a voice than sometimes the parent sitting there who has way more knowledge of their kid and also maybe some other letters behind their name. But in this situation, it's just kind of received like a head nod, a maybe, we hear you. And I think there's moments where you think like, oh, there's comprehension, and then there's no carry through. And it's this repeated cycle of, well, they're okay. Look, they're cute. I've heard that. Look how cute they are. And you're like, well, cute's not going to get us through life, right? I mean, not most of us.
So I'm curious, what are some of the things when you were diagnosed? What are some of those things that you looked back at, maybe in childhood or even when you were in school, where you think, "Oh yes, of course, that was ADHD, and nobody had any idea."
Yeah. Well, oh my gosh, from the ground up. I don't know if, it's a vivid, I don't know if it's a gift or a curse. I have vivid memories of extreme sensory challenges, like terrified that a spider that was outside was probably going to somehow find his way in and he would touch me. You know, that was the whole like, or my clothes. I remember thinking like the turtleneck was going to swallow me. It just felt like it was squeezing my head so tightly. And of course, my mother didn't know, like, why would we even pick that battle? Let's just move to the next shirt, right? So that could result in a lot of upset. And the same with food. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with the lights off because I couldn't swallow peas, or I couldn't eat peas because they would like pop in my mouth, or green beans that came from a can. And the solution then was like, let's turn off the lights and make her sit there while everybody watches TV. And I remember thinking, all right, if I fill this glass with water, I can get them in there and then I could swallow them whole and they'll release me from the kitchen table, right? But it never taught me to deal with, the textures. And then the next really big hallmark, and I think this is so important because I realized it happened to more people than just me. First, they allowed me to come to kindergarten, which was such a big deal because my birthday was like 3 days after the cutoff. And then after 2 weeks, for some reason I had no idea of, because I was so excited to be there, they said, no, you can't come back until next year. So I remember just shame setting in then that something was really wrong with me, but I didn't know what. And they wouldn't let me come back. And then the next year, I came back a little bit more scared to be there, but happy. And then I remember spending so much time in the hallway. Like, Robin, take your desk, put it in the hallway. At 30, when I really started to realize this was, ADHD, I found a report card from kindergarten and it said, immature talks too much. And I was like, well, of course I talk too much. And why didn't she tell me that was the reason she kept moving me in the hall? Why didn't they tell me that's why? I thought, and friends laugh at this, but it's true. I thought she was moving my seat because she wanted me to get to know everybody in the room. So I thought, oh, this is what we're doing. We're moving around the room to get to know everybody. No, no, that's not what we were doing. So, there's those. And then I have fast forward, memories where I'm trying to think, but there were some really, really good ones of, being a teacher and having my first classroom and then having to orchestrate not just like the decorating of the room, but the students' IEPs, the students' needs, being on time. What do I wear? How do I uphold? Because it was like my first time doing life in an unstructured environment all by myself, right? Like, so how do I make sure I have food and clothes and all these things, needs met? And then, and a teacher's assistant. So no instructions. Here's a person you get to boss around and have help you. And oh my gosh, just so many funny stories there that I look back and I'm like, oh, that was so ADHD. But being late, like being 5 minutes late on a regular basis that people could predict, and almost getting it to a system that I was like 5 minutes late. But it was annoying to people. And I remember the eye rolls and the sighs and I'm like, what? I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best. And I don't think then I had the awareness that I could kind of do some things to trick myself into being on time. But yeah, embarrassment, I think that people saw things too that I didn't see. And the last one, I really have to share this, was getting out of high school with a C. And I can tell you this now because I have had 4.0 experiences, okay? Getting out of high school with a C average, realizing that my best writing was probably like a C or D. So I have no idea how they let me into a state school. I was just thrilled they did. And failing out to the point where they said, listen, if you take this study skills class and you get, B's, we'll let you stay. And if you don't, you're going home. I think that was the first time I really, really realized, wow, there's something very different. But the study skills class changed my focus of my life and probably even drove my career now as to where it is, because it just laid this foundation of teaching me how to learn, giving me formatted, like, here, you need a planner. Guess what? In the study guide is everything you need to know for the test. And I remember those moments being like epiphanies to me. So I don't know, those are a lot of moments over 50 years, but
Yeah.
they stick with you, I think, on some level. Yeah.
That is amazing. I've offhandedly, I have remarked on this podcast how I wish they taught executive functioning in school and not like cooking or, home and home ec as like a sweeping term. And I actually had a really sweet home ec teacher email me once and say, we actually do teach a lot of executive functioning in home ec. I was like, I need to formally apologize for the record, because I never took home ec, but I feel like that it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because it is one of those things I wish, like, if I could go back and do it all over again, like, especially knowing what I know now and being back in school and seeing how, gosh, it would have been so helpful to really understand executive functioning at a
Oh,
much younger age. And I had never even heard of the term as just a lay person. I had never even heard of the term until well after my diagnosis through
yeah.
research. But yeah.
Well, and I keep thinking, you and I are on the same page with that. Why aren't we teaching it from the ground up? I mean, there's so many, every person, every human, uses their executive functions. Most people have strengths somewhere and challenges someplace. And what would it be like if every course that a child had from even someplace in elementary or pre-K, wherever we could hit a developmental, milestone that made sense, just start incorporating it with every lesson they have? Wouldn't
Mm.
that be magical, to the point where they start taking over their accommodations, for themselves, because it's just built in? Because we know it's in writing, it's in reading, it's in math, but we're not there yet. I like the yet. We're not there yet.
So now, how did you transition from teaching to then working with adults and mostly coaching now, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting journey. So I had this awareness of ADHD and did the whole hyper focus and learn about ADHD till I just couldn't anymore, right? Like, I absorbed everything I could at that time. And then I ended up, we were planners. So I had a child and we had decided, I would stay home. Well, that in and of itself is a whole conversation. Being a mom, having ADHD, I always say, like, okay, what they didn't tell me was everything I had to do for myself, which I was barely doing, I now am going to have to do for, as many living people or animals, because we have pets, that I bring into this house. And maybe if they had said that rather than, oh, look, they're so cute, I might have, I love my children, so please don't take this literally, right? But I might have been like, I don't know that I'm qualified to be a mom. This is a little big. But back to your question, I so I'm a stay-at-home mom, which seemed like my ideal job, and I'm realizing, like, wow, this is so hard. And also, as hard as it was, I needed something else also, right? Like, so that, I think that's a classic ADHD. I need my brain. There's another part of my brain that still needs stimulation. And I had always been, I think we share this quality that, you're on this path right now, I think. But I'd always thought, oh, I'd love to be a social worker, counselor, therapist, But I already had a master's in education. I had a solid career. I was tenured. It wasn't logical. But I started kind of dreaming, and I would look. So in the times, like, the kids were napping and I finally had things together, which were rare, I would dream. I would look online, and I found a master's program in counseling, and I thought, I'm going to take one class. So I delve into that, and the reading, at the same time, I had a cousin diagnosed with autism, and I'm becoming as hyper, like, excited. And I'd met, I came out of college in 1996 when Asperger syndrome was in the DSM, I think 1994. So I was meeting all these little people with this new diagnosis, and they look like these typical kids, except some social, stuff that was awkward, or little quirky things, I think at the time is what it felt like as a professional. So when my cousin got diagnosed, I just became as mesmerized with autism, and that lined up with when I was doing my master's and was really given a lot of freedom in terms of topic, and like, here's the assignment, but your topic could be whatever. So I did a lot of studying around ADHD, autism, but in adults and marriages and relationships. And that became the connector, of, I had no idea where it was going to go. As a matter of fact, I still had moments where I was like, I'm never doing that, but yet I would write about it. I'm probably going to work with trauma, but I'm writing about autism and ADHD. Mm-hmm. And I graduated, and I was like, I'm going to take some space and do life. Financially, we were able for me to do that. I had given away the career teaching position. So I was going to be with the kids still, even though they're in school at this point, but I'm going to, get our house back in shape, kind of collect myself. And I started getting calls from people I went to school with that said, I have this adult that has autism. I have this adult that has ADHD. I have this couple in a marriage. And I was spouting off for free, like, all this information. And there was this sparkle inside, right? Like, oh, I want to do this. Mm-hmm. I want to do this. And a friend said, would you please just go do it and stop giving it away for free? You're making me crazy. I can't even watch it anymore, right? Like, you obviously want to do this. And so, the bridge into coaching was through an organization in New England called AANE. They work with adults with what was called Asperger's, now Autism 1. And they had a coaching program. I thought, well, coaches just are people who want to be therapists, until I met them and I went through their training, and I was like, wow, no, this is a whole nother field that, if done well and done ethically, which people are, doing it all kinds of different ways because it's not regulated right now, but there's a value here. I knew that a lot of neurodivergent people had been unintentionally harmed in therapy. They'd go once and they were not going back. But when you say coach, and you're saying, I'm not going to diagnose you, there's no healing, I'm just coming alongside of you, and what's the problem you want to solve, right? That's a whole different mindset. And for some people, not everyone, that's appropriate, and it's safe, and then you grow. So that was kind of my bridge into the coaching world. And that's exactly, I work with neurodiverse adults and couples.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Oh, yeah, I feel like we do have so many parallels in terms of just the seeing and like you said, like the associative thinking about seeing some of the ways in which these like siloed approaches to mental health could really benefit from, all of these different more holistic approaches, but at the same time also being like, I'm so fascinated. I like gathering different certifications here and there and just being lifelong learners, right? Being like, God, this is so interesting. I want to do this and I want to do this. And I feel like every day I'm like decided, I'll go to the library and be like, I want to be a librarian. How do I, and I want to own a coffee shop. But also seeing, like you said, some of the real harm that is done in counseling, just around, what is believed to be maybe maladaptive thinking, or, some of the ways in which there's a real focus on behavioral change and not a lot of work on understanding what's behind that. And I think it's it is really fascinating. And I think for me, I came at it as a coach, realizing like, God, I would really benefit from, I'll probably stay coaching, but I feel like I would really benefit from having the counseling background as well, kind of because it feels like the two of them work really, really well together. And it just also seems like in the curriculum of the counseling program I'm in, that there is much more of a move toward stuff that I had already been taught as a coach, right? A lot of that, like you said, that now what? How do I, yes. That forward thinking and that forward movement. And so it does seem like it's almost being built into, like, I had a professor who said, like, counseling is now what coaching was 10 years ago.
See,
maybe. I feel like we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I've been So I graduated with my counseling degree in 2014. And so I really skipped, other than my internships, skipped working as a counselor. I had the opportunities, but decided I was going to go work for myself and jumped into the coaching lane. And again, hyper focused on what do coaches do and really being ethical and staying in my lane. And I think especially because I have a therapy background, right? But therapists can coach. Coaches can't do therapy. And so that has always been my question. Will I go and actually use the therapy? So many people said, Robin, you have both. We need therapists too. And I'm like, yeah, but we need coaches. And my client list is full. So for right now, what I've done, and I love doing this, it's been such a great surprise in doing this work, is partnering with the therapists that my clients have and just having really great dialogue or consultations and saying, because fair, I only learned about neurodiversity because I pursued it. It wasn't in my counseling program. So I have that compassion that, if there was harm, it was likely unintentional. It was like, I was never taught this, so how would I know to switch my lens and consider neurology before thinking about mental health, right? Like making sure, is this person on the spectrum? Does this person have ADHD? How are they looking at life? What is their perspective? So I get this gift of having like small little moments with therapists and say, well, look, can I tell you what you're describing right now in this couple? Right? It's not just high conflict. It fits this pattern I see on a regular basis. If you thought about it like this, what would that change how you think about it? Or have you read this book? That might help you. Or what about this skill? Or, one, I think that was key. And I talk to people about a lot because I'll get feedback from a neurodivergent adult that's like getting told they're being passive aggressive because they aren't cooperating with the therapist. They didn't do the work and they failed therapy. And I'm like, okay, at the end of the session, did you know that there was homework? And the wife or husband who knows is like, yes, we did. And I'm like, wait, hold on. Did you know that there was homework? And they're like, no, like there was no idea that there was carryover or expectation sometimes. If there was awareness there, it was never made concrete. It wasn't where, when, why, how is this going to happen? Do you see any obstacles that'll get in the way? And because, one, therapy can be a really so can coaching, anxiety producing, activity for somebody who's, working on change and doesn't really know the process and feels like they've messed up a lot. So their anxiety's high, their brain's already not functioning at full speed. And now we're not really making concrete our expectations that need to happen after therapy. And that's one of the greatest connectors I can make. It's such a huge impact for both, I think, the therapist and the client, to realize like, oh, you're not being passive aggressive. You're not working against me. This is just like, we can just make this concrete and be on the same page. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great description of, of the way in which many times we need very explicit instructions and also an explicit kind of very structured understanding of what steps are. And
Yeah.
it's one of the things that doesn't come naturally, I think, to a lot of us in our own lives, but also then when it comes to what we need when it comes to like instructions and even just learning. And I think why, phrases like goals can be really loaded, right? Like, sometimes I'll see that like crush your goals with coaching. And I'm like, the first thing I do when I work with clients is like, what is your relationship with the word goals? Because oftentimes we don't meet our own goals and we have a really hard time even creating them anymore because we're so tired of disappointing ourselves. And so I'm like, let's even talk about that. Just that word alone. And, what kind of baggage does a client come into your relationship with in terms of, where we failed in the past and not known why and been very confused about it and let down, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So now that you sort of answered this, but like what is the main difference between couples therapy and couples coaching?
Oh, I think the biggest is I'm not I'm not healing mental health challenges. And so that conversation comes up really fast in our, first meeting, or even like free 30-minute call to see if we're a good fit. And you and I know that there's a lot of co-occurring, anxiety, depression, regulation challenges that can come with ADHD or autism. So um, I just walk into that. It's not saying I'm not going to work with you, but coaching is really stressful. And so if you are working with a therapist to heal mental health challenges, then as a coach, I'm going to talk to your therapist and we're going to see, what level is appropriate and good for you to not cause too much stress. And if you're not, but you have, and you're saying you're managing whatever anxiety, depression you have, or you've never had that, then we're going to work on building awareness and then moving forward to reach your goals, which is a lot of building up skills and, you know, really chunking down, finding out what the obstacles are and, overcoming them, and it's a lot of experiments to find out along the way, what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And so it's, I have this contract that asks people for homework commitment, right? And if you're not doing your homework, then we're going to have a conversation. That's all it says. We're going to have a conversation. Some people are really nervous about that, right? Like they're like, well, what if I forget? I'm like, okay, so we're really talking about homework progress, right? Did you put forth your best attempt? And then when you come back, can we build the awareness as to why it went well, what didn't go well, or if you tackled it again, how would we go about this better? Do we need to break it down into smaller steps? Do we need to just talk about it? I love that you addressed the goal language. I might steal that. I don't think I've ever said it that blatantly. But do we just to talk about it in a different way that helps you feel better? Or do we need to build comfort into whatever was happening, so that it feels right? There's more and more coming out that talks about that, the relationship of self-regulation connected with executive function and how big it is. When you feel calm in the space, you can tackle things that you can't otherwise tackle. So just really jumping in and tackling that. So how's that differ from a therapist, right? We don't ever, we go back in telling a story, but it's very purposeful if that's happening after the first session where we're really just getting to know each other as quickly as we can. Let me hear about, I'll give you an example. I worked with a guy who super smart and had stopped, he had gotten let go over COVID and just really wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating, really challenged with, pulling his executive functions together to look for a job. And so I think mental health might have went back and looked at, are you depressed? Are you anxious? And he said, I'm not depressed or anxious. I've done this before. And I was like, I know you've done this before. So we went back to talk about, how did you do this before? And what went well? And right, so we want to keep those parts that really went well. And then, do any of those apply to where you are now? And how do we push those things forward? So there's a lot more forward movement and less evaluation of, not to say we don't talk about how you feel, but evaluating having your feelings be well, maybe is a good way to say it, in coaching, and a lot more doing, right?
Yeah, and I think also once we can look at things a little more objectively, then like you said, there's just as much valuable information from when you achieve something as if you didn't achieve it, right? Because then we can look and say, okay, what do we need to do differently? What were the barriers? What stood in your way? So that's all really important information as long as it's not laden with shame. So let's work on the shame and the mindset first so that we can then really get productive about what works and what doesn't work. And I think in couples too, I know just my own history with my husband, so much of it was miscommunication in terms of how something was given versus how it was received. And I think there's just so much work to do in when one or both of the couple individuals. I was like, what's the word for one half of a couple? But like, if you know, if one or both are neurodivergent, I think there is a lot of that feeling like help can be seen as judgment, right? And I think that that was something, I know I remember talking to Casey Davis once about when I was a stay-at-home mother and my husband would come home and immediately when he walked through the door, he would start cleaning up. And I took that to mean he was upset at how messy the house was, and he was
Yes.
disappointed in me, and he was thought I was lazy and I wasn't doing anything. Like I had this whole story about what that meant. As opposed to his story, which was Katie's been working so hard. She's with a kid all day. And here I am. The first thing I want to do when I get home is help her and take the load off for her. Right. And
Yeah.
so, but it was like two completely different stories.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of the time it really is about just getting to those communication challenges and the communication differences.
Yeah. And I think so that's I love that example of you and your husband because it's such a perspective taking difference, right? But without somebody noticing that you know you're internally telling different stories or you're externally talking about the same event but just from different angles, a couple can get really stuck there for a long, long time, and anger and resentment and negativity can really build up. So a lot of the couples work in interesting is the similar to working with an individual in that, right? It's communication, executive function, and self-regulation. A lot of the obstacles lie in one of those three areas for neurodivergent people and then couples. And when you think about a system, that's really what a family is. It's not much different of having yourself in space at work than it is at home, except for the expectation of how, you know, deeply you're known. You know, there's a little bit more, I'm going to use the word nakedness, but I mean emotional nakedness. There's that kind of nakedness too, but emotional nakedness and vulnerability. And so that person can become even more dangerous and scary to you, or you may, you know, take your internal thoughts and put it on them even faster because they're so close. And so really like digging in a way that and I think lived experience, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I think lived experience as the professional is one of those connectors that creates the safety. And not to say, you know, neurotypicals can't work with neurodivergence. I don't mean that in any way. But when you can say, so, you know, I'm wondering if your partner's sitting in the car at the agreed upon time to leave, and are you gathering your things at that time, jumping in the shower, or contemplating how you're going to leave at that time? And are they angry? You know, they're like, are you at our house? Have you been here?
Yeah, that's very true. There's like a shorthand there. So tell me about this. So Uniquely Us. This is a book that you participated in. It looks really, really interesting. Can you tell me about it and kind of how you got involved?
Yeah. So, you know, there's so much to do when you own your own business now, and you can easily are you writing? Are you creating content? Do you have courses? What do you, so right now I'm at the, you experience it?
Like, I was just like, exhale. Yes.
Yes.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, thank you. I'm so glad because you look, you know, everybody looks so good on their website or on their podcast. So to hear you say that or have that reaction is very, very healthy for me. Because I think that's the place where I am. I really stepped into this arena to do one-to-one coaching, and we've been well received, you know, and more than I realized. I have a lot of imposter syndrome. So I'm like, wait, me? Really? Okay. And also just even if it feels horrible, even if it feels like they can't possibly be talking to me, I'm not going to miss an opportunity. So I'll step into it, you know, a little bit uncomfortable because I know I can't miss it. But what's happened is, you know, that question, I was sitting right at the cusp of it, really doing nothing. I mean, not doing nothing, but just coaching. And a colleague said, Dr. Stephanie Holmes said, and she has a podcast also, but she said, Robin, will you write this chapter in my book? And will you write it about executive function and the impact on neurodiverse couples? And I said, yes, but inside I was like, you know, massive panic attack because I haven't written in 10 years since I did my last master's degree. And as we pull each other up, because I think this is a field where that happens, a lot. That's always been my experience so far anyway. I said, I'm not sure. And she said, yes, you can. You have 2 master's degrees. I know you can. And here's the deadline, right? So it was a great, great experience. It's really cool to find the space in my brain and pull my executive functions together to be able to dig into the research of what I was doing and even grow more and learn more. And so it's a nice little summary and a really beginning. So it's opened the door for me to, continue with my own book, which I think is going to happen in the next year or so. But it just lays the foundation of the ways that executive function impacts neurodiverse relationships, which is so much more significant than I realized before I started working with couples. And then we end with some like case studies. And, so the purpose of her book, which is really cool, is it goes a little further than just, let's talk about neurodiversity. Let's talk about neurodiversity in couples, which needs to be talked about, right? Like there's a huge market to be talking about that right now. But it also is addressing things that were happening in the church and the literalism that can happen in the church and the way that was impacting couples or is impacting couples, to start just kind of bringing a voice to some topics that, people were feeling really isolated and alone in. And so I'm excited to be part of her team. She's pretty brave in her writing, and it's an exciting moment.
Yeah, I got a chance to look at a little bit of the blurbs before. I'm not sure. It's going to be a couple. I think this episode will be out before before the book comes out, but I'll make sure to put a link so people can reserve a copy. It looks really great. And I think, like you said, especially for women, I think there are a lot of conflicting roles around domesticity and, motherhood and being a good wife that conflict with neurodivergence in a lot of ways. In terms of our essence and like you said, needing to operate on a higher frequency and needing to be busy. And, I was like you, I worked with my first child and I was miserable and I couldn't handle it all. And I said to my husband, if we have another child, I have to be a stay-at-home mother. I cannot work. And so we did that. We left the city. We moved somewhere where we could afford so that it was just his income. And then I was a stay-at-home mom and I was like, oh crap, this is worse.
We had the exact same experience. I wish we were neighbors.
I know, right? I was like, God, I'm so bored. I was just like, oh, I made a terrible mistake. Yeah. But again, I think it's really like, if only I understood back then really that I, first of all, was a great mom the whole time. But really like, what were the strengths of what did I need? And what were, all of that I think is so important. And as women, I think there's just, it's not something, there's so much stigma around being the best mother and being happy with your lot and being, always delighted and always have an apple pie on the windowsill and all of that. And so I think there is so much sort of stigma and shame around any woman who secretly wants anything else. So it's incredible.
And saying this is hard, right? Yeah. Because we look forward to children for so long and then you're like, what? This is what it is? It's almost taboo to say that, but
well, or even to say, it feels hard because I'm not doing it the way I need to be doing it, right? As opposed to the fact that what we often say, which is I'm not trying hard enough, or I, like you said, I have to get my act together, and figure it out because, anyway, yeah.
Well, but it's a great lesson. I think the thing is that the more I grow as a person, and I'm still on this journey, I'm still in therapy, I'm still doing the whole thing, but to be able to give ourselves compassion first, right? Even our younger selves. So I look back at the mom who didn't have the right outfit. How in elementary school they need the certain special 100-day outfit, and you're like, oh, that's tomorrow and it's midnight. I don't know if you had that experience.
Oh yes.
But going back and giving compassion and remembering the things I had done well that day, even though that outfit didn't turn out nearly as cool as maybe 5 other kids in the class. There probably was another mom having the same experience I did, but I didn't know it at the time. I didn't experience that. And then really, I think in that process, I bring better compassion to myself now. And it's a cool way to be 50, to start looking back at the 30 somethings and going like, hey, I'm giving you compassion now, and I'm giving you compassion now, and I'm giving you compassion now, because it's teaching a whole nother generation. I'll say I'm the first generation of aware of neurodivergence, right? Aware of my brain and how it works in my family. And so I think that's common. Many of us are the first generation. And so then to be able to now go, okay, we're going to be the first generation, and we're also going to be feeding and nurturing the generation that's coming up behind us. That's a pretty cool way to be. At least that's how I'm getting through, because I already turned 51. But it's a pretty cool way.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is. And I think one of the things I am really, really grateful for with my diagnosis, even though I was 45 at the time, it's so radically transformed how I parent and how I view my parenting. And it's radically transformed just my how I show up for my spouse. Like it has been really incredible to watch, that how, like you said, I'm able to just speak a different language with my kids in a way that I feel like is so empowering to them. And they love the fact that they have ADHD, and they love being neurodivergent, and they see all of the strengths about it. Yeah, it is really nice to be able to empower them in that way as a parent.
Yeah. And it is. I just went to the ADHD conference in Baltimore, which was such a cool experience to be surrounded with all these, other people that think like you. But one of the speakers, and avoiding the over positivity, right? But it was a cool moment to just keep hearing people say ADHD is my superpower. It might be my greatest challenge also, but it comes with a lot of really cool uniqueness that if you can embrace it and you can turn it into a life that feels right for you, and be confident in what you are good at, then yeah, it's a cool place to be. And I see that difference. We started this conversation saying like 20 years you've got to know that you have ADHD. And I'm like, yeah, but 20 years ago, it was still a story that had a lot of shame. And now it's a story that's empowered, where I'm like, but look, all these degrees turn into a career that works for my life, that empowers other people, that gives me influence. And so, you know, it's a good story. I'm glad to hear your children are there now, because that means they won't be the 30-year-old who feels, embarrassed to ask for what they need. And that's what I hope our story is, by the time your children are teenagers, so like 15 years.
Yeah, right. I hope so. But
I hope
it's
so.
like you said, I think it really is. It's no coincidence that there has been this change over the last 20 years, thanks to Ned Hallowell and Sari
Oh my
Solden and
gosh.
Kathleen Nadeau, and a lot of those pioneers who showed what it looked like to be an adult, right? And I think, it's probably no coincidence that this has changed. This mindset around ADHD has transformed alongside an increase in adult diagnoses and an increase in female diagnoses. And I think, like that was just really well said about how our understanding has shifted to a sense of mindset and acceptance about this, what is wonderful and this gift, as opposed to looking at like, how are we going to fix it and how are we going to cure it, and all of the ways that it used to be looked at. So yeah. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you, Robin. I'm curious, do you have another name for ADHD? If you could go back and rename it.
Yeah. I don't. I really, if I could rename, and I think remembering I live in this land that merges ADHD and autism on a regular basis, I would just say I would call it neurodivergence or neurodivergent, because there's so much, we're still looking at so much overlap and so many. And then I think if I went even further, I would really love to see a world where we just start talking about humans in general, and their strengths and challenges, because that would just even the playing field, right? And it would say, like, what are you good at? What's hard for you? How do we come together as a team and move forward towards whatever goal it is, whether that would be professional, friendship, romantic. And I think so. I think that's naive. That's my naivety coming out. And if I had to do a rename, Yeah, I think I'd go with neurodivergent.
Well, I love that too about, eventually someday we'll just call it being human because I think it comes back to the idea that you said earlier about like waiting and, we don't get accommodations until we're really struggling. And if we could change that narrative and really treat each person as an individual and operate under that assumption of the fact that everybody wants to succeed. So if you're not succeeding, what help do you need, right? It's not like you've just chosen to it's not show up, that
Yes.
like there's something that you need. And if we could look at every child that way, if we could look at every human that way, I think it would do us all a
Yeah.
big
Or,
service.
the way you talk about executive function, there's a lot of people I work with that do really, really well at whatever their chosen profession is, so much so they get promoted. And then comes a lot of space and skill expectation that isn't taught, right? And so if we had that mindset of strengths challenges in every area of life, we go, okay, what are you good at in this position? And what can we teach you so that you can move into this position? How fast, or slow does that need to go for you? What's the just right speed of that transition? How many of these skills can you take on? Because the people that I meet, that I work with, and I hope you can tell I'm really fond of them as people and believers of them, are smart, are capable, they earned the position. But the fact that you're not taught how to make that transition, or what is going to be expected, what are the social skills, what are the social expectations, what's the culture here, how am I supposed to schedule all these activities and also do the job I was doing before, meetings, conferences, speaking events. So yeah, that's, again, I think I'm on my soapbox, but that's my naive hope and dream. If I could wave the magical wand, out into the
Yeah.
universe.
Well, even, talk about the next generation too. Like I feel like, for so long, couples counseling, couples coaching, I'm sure also has a real stigma, right? Which is like, you don't go into couples counseling unless you're on the brink of divorce, unless you're in real trouble. And once you're actually when you're actually experiencing couples counseling is for really, really strong relationships where people want to improve it, right? Like there's a deep love and respect that it brings people to couples counseling. And I
Yeah.
really, again, I feel like it's the younger generation, I love hearing young people in their 20s who like aren't even married, but they and their boyfriend or girlfriend are like in couples counseling because it should go with any relationship, right? I'm
Well,
like that, right?
yeah,
That should be
shouldn't we
like the
do
wedding
this?
gift.
Yes, or before. I
Yeah.
I will tell you, I've had an interesting shift in clients, and it's been so exciting. And really, when I started, I would say, oh, it was average 10 years a couple had been together, kids already, and there was distance and isolation and history, right, to overcome of miscommunications and misunderstanding. But really, in the last year and a half, I've started getting, I have a couple right now that isn't even married yet. They're getting married. So if you guys are listening, yay, congratulations. But they're getting married, and they called me and said, hey, we think one or each of us, are neurodivergent. We don't even know, but we really want to nail this. Like, we want to get down. We would like you to teach us and coach us through what you think we need to know. And we do have a few areas, right, where we know we need some help. And they have been so exciting. And they're not the only ones. I've gotten a few that we've been married a month, right? We've been married a couple years. So exciting because we don't have to go back and undo, there's not this need for as much forgiveness or as much, hurt in each other's heart, and building skills to have those conversations, which can be really much harder than talking about, let's have a planning meeting every week so that we know where each person is and we can count on each other. Let's talk about, when are we going to clean the house so that, for example, you aren't, scurrying at the end of the day or feeling like a total, failure because somebody, your husband walks in and there's things laying around. Is that even an expectation? Is he even
Yeah.
somebody that needs that done, or is he totally fine, with the things laying around? Those are communication, things that can cause a lot of problems over the years, and also hurt words said to each other, because we're really finding out too, a lot of response comes out of, almost what they're labeling like a trauma reaction, right? Like a fight, flight, or freeze reaction that, oh my gosh, you're going to be angry at me. but you don't even know because you've never had this conversation with your partner in the first place. So, yeah, exciting
Yeah.
stuff to see younger people coming forward to ask for help before there is a problem and not having any stigma, you know.
Right? Yeah, I'm like, all right, out for 2024 engagement rings in coaching.
There you go. Yes, yes, yes.
Much better way. I'd much rather spend money on coaching than a diamond ring. So there we go.
Yeah, don't take this the wrong way, guys, but here's some skill building. You're going to need it.
Right. Well, what a wonderful field. Really fascinating. Thank you for sharing a little bit about it. I'm really excited for you and for your
Yeah.
clients too, and the Uniquely Us book, and got a lot of great stuff going on. So
Yeah.
I'm so glad to have finally met you, and hopefully we can keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, if anybody wants to reach out, my email address or my website is robintatellc.com. So that's probably the best way to reach me. Um, and I'm hoping, I'm excited. I told you I'm in the state of overwhelm. Well, that usually kind of leads to some good next stuff. So I'm excited
Uh,
about some future writings, but I don't have dates or solid titles.
well, exciting. Well, I can't wait. Awesome. Well, thanks, Robin.
Thank you.